Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Season 3 premiere of Celestial Oddities, the PONG, Pair of Normal Guys podcast. I'm your host, Frater Crow.
And I am your co-host, Daniel James.
And we would like to thank you for listening in this evening. Whether you are listening live, streaming after the fact, or you've downloaded this to your device for on the go, thank you for your patronage and support. It means a lot to us. But please make sure you click the like, share, and follow button on whatever platforms you're listening to us from. Whether it be iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Deezer, Spreaker, CastBox, Google Play, or Amazon Podcast. Hell, even any of the other providers in between that we might have missed, listen where you feel most comfortable, but by clicking those buttons, it moves us up the podcast community rankings, allows more people to discover the show, keeps you in the loop with new episodes as they air, and gives you unfiltered access to our past archives, not only of this show here, which is Celestial Oddities, based upon, paranormal and supernatural phenomena, bringing on guests to interview them that are professionals within this field, and taking on phone calls from fans just like you from around the world to tell us your amazing stories of, supernatural encounters. Or it be our Knights of the Nephilim show, based on esoteric science, occult doctrine, ritual magic, and bringing on some of the biggest and best names across the world as practitioners, authors, ritual toolmakers, and mystics. Or lastly, uncovering the underground, where we bring on artists from music and modeling, stars of the big screen, comedy oddities, and everything in between. We give you everything that you could want in underground entertainment. Brutal Business Entertainment and Celestial Oddities Radio, 100% real and raw underground entertainment. If you're familiar with us and our show, you know what to expect. If not, welcome. We will air every other week, 8:30 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, deep diving into content matter of the strange and unusual. And throughout the season, there might be a few double weeks where we do 1 or 2 episodes, more than normal, and there might be some weeks where we switch the episodes around or have to miss a week. So if you're wondering what our schedule is, make sure you go to the Celestial Oddities Pair of Normal Guys podcast fan page or group page on Facebook, and that'll give you all the upcoming news of what we're doing and gives you a great place where everybody can kind of talk amongst each other and compare ideas when it comes to the paranormal. Now, Daniel, are you excited for this evening's episode?
Yeah, man, I'm ready to get back into this.
Oh, absolutely. We got a great one for you this evening, folks. A great season opener. We're going to be talking about the Bermuda Triangle of Pennsylvania, a stretch of mountainscape in southwestern Pennsylvania, which sweeps across many different counties and many different townships, from Derry to Latrobe, Connellsville, Blairsville, Uniontown, Kecksburg, even goes the whole way into Morgantown, West Virginia. There have been sightings and phenomenal happening around these townships for over 120 years, which is just phenomenal. And when we talk about there being some encounters, we're not talking 3, 4, 5. We're talking hundreds. So it's pretty interesting, and I look forward to jumping into that tonight with you, Daniel.
Yeah, man, I have a lot to talk about, a lot to remark about, and maybe even a little something to show you guys.
All right, folks. Well, you heard it. So take a moment and close your eyes, zone away, and think about that time in your life that something strange has happened that you just cannot explain. Whether you're a believer or not, think about that for a moment, because every one of us have had that. So journey back to that time in your mind and listen to this in the meantime. We'll be right back on Celestial Oddities.
Are ghosts real? Several recent encounters suggest there might be more things in heaven and earth than we can dream of.
So are werewolves just a Hollywood creation, or do half-man, half-wolf creatures really exist? Now, tonight, we kick off our Conspiracy Theory Month series, which was
The legend of the vampire actually goes back for centuries, and it exists in some form or another in almost every culture. In fact, some people believe the first vampire story was in the Bible.
Well, for decades, only crackpots and crazy people believed in UFOs. That's what I thought anyway. And then in recent years, it turns out that governments have been taking them seriously all along.
Try and clear up an ancient mystery with the help of a prominent veterinarian who says she can prove that Bigfoot exists and that he's related to all of us.
New reports, 5 pilots coming forward over the weekend saying they've had multiple mid-air encounters with high-flying, fast-moving objects.
All right, guys, we are here on Celestial Oddities Radio talking about Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, talking about, Chestnut Ridge, Pennsylvania, the Bermuda Triangle of phenomena that has been happening here in Pennsylvania, southwestern Pennsylvania, for well over 100 years, and we're going to deep dive right into it. So, Daniel, would you like I to start, or me to start, or would you like to start?
You go ahead and kick us off, and then I'm gonna run. I'm gonna run after you.
All right, so folks, there's been an interesting thing happening for quite some time. There's a mountainscape, as I mentioned prior to the intro there, that expands across several townships here in southwestern Pennsylvania, that over a 120-year span of time, there has been dozens and dozens of UFO sightings, strange lights in the sky, paranormal and ghostly experiences, and an overwhelming amount of cryptid and Bigfoot sightings. And as I said before, we're not talking 3 or 4, 5 or 10. We're talking dozens upon dozens of sightings, a lot of them interacting with one another, people that didn't know one another. So it's very interesting, the amount of different an array of things that people are seeing and experiencing here. And some of the things that really will, stand out to some of you if you haven't heard of it. One of the towns in that mountainscape of Chestnut Ridge is called Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. Kecksburg was founded by the Keck family, and they were a family who bottled soft drinks. They moved to that area of Westmoreland County and Mount Pleasant, and was settling home, was founding this town. Well, years later, this town would be rocked and known not for, families like the Kecks, but for a UFO crashing. And not only that, one of the best and well-known UFO crashes in American history. And this was, you'd think, wow, that's such a huge event. And since then, there's been a lot of sightings. You'd think that's where it starts. No, it started much, much earlier with sightings of Bigfoot and ape-like men that people would see in the woods of southwestern Pennsylvania. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that this evening, and specifically the Kecksburg crash. But it is interesting, usually where people are seeing UFOs or having spottings of any type of alienistic beings, usually it follows suit that shortly after people are seeing other type of activities such as Bigfoot. And that is the case here, that a lot of times over the decades, within days and sometimes the same day, in different areas of this range, you would have someone report seeing a UFO in the sky, and someone 3 towns over or a county over reports seeing a Bigfoot-like creature running through his yard. So hand in hand, and there's been some wild accounts. So Daniel and I are certainly excited to jump into that this evening and talk about that. Daniel, you think we should start with Kecksburg itself, or do we want to, kind of deep dive into some of these different sightings?
Well, let me just go ahead and introduce my experience with this hotspot, this paranormal hotspot, and how I came into it real quick. I have a good friend, Caroline Atlas Lehan from California, and she, I think it was 2019, I think was the year. She was visiting Lauren and I from the West Coast, and her and I we're like Indiana Jones, okay? We like to go out there into the woods, into the world, and see what we can find, see what happens, And so the first place that we had went was called the Serpent Mound in Ohio, which is a little bit of a paranormal hotspot is into itself, but it's more, historically famous for it being somewhat of like an Indian burial ground. And we know that there has been a lot of UFO extraterrestrial sightings in the area in addition to Sasquatch. But there's just a lot of like historical implications that people in certain like subcategories and sub-communities of the extraterrestrial communities talk about the connections of the Serpent Mound to, like star constellations and things like that. And that it's also said, it's also believed by a lot of people that the Serpent Mound in Ohio actually serves as a map that leads to one of the crystal skulls, which I think is a really interesting topic that we could maybe reserve for another time. But so we went out, Lauren and I and Caroline went to the Serpent Mound for a whole day to investigate it. And this kind of got Caroline really, like, it got her really excited to investigate and explore more areas. So I remember that same weekend we went to West Virginia we went to Point Pleasant, which is, obviously the paranormal hotspot of the Mothman. And so we were just kind of like in this explorational, adventurous mindset of trying to go out to these areas and just sort of be in the energy of them and see what happens. And after that trip ended, she went home and she gets a hold of me and she's we're watching like these documentaries on like Amazon Prime and trying to find all of these like cryptozoology documentaries, because all of a sudden we have like this hysteria around looking for Bigfoot and things like that, me, Lauren, and Caroline. And she did some research and she said, did you know that there is a paranormal hotspot that's an hour from your house it's being called on the internet as the Bermuda Triangle of Pennsylvania? I said, absolutely not. What is this paranormal hotspot that you speak of? I have no idea. I have never heard of it. So then we do some Googling and some research, and there was actually low-budget independent documentaries produced about this same area by other filmmakers. So I watched one or two of the films, and then I did some light research, and like, lo and behold, all of a sudden, just over an hour from my house is like one of the most paranormal hot spots for cryptozoology, and I think probably in like this corner of the East Coast. And so Caroline, she's like all about this. She's so excited. So she talked me and Lauren into wanting to go there and to check it out. So she plans a trip. She comes back a second time. And as Frater and I are good friends, I really felt called to collaborate with him and get involved with him more, which is how we sort of came up with the idea to actually produce our own documentary, which was appropriately titled The Bermuda Triangle of Pennsylvania. So I had never even known this place existed. Mind you, I lived in PA for 5 years, or maybe 4 years at the time, and didn't know that this place where they have like werewolves, was an hour from my house. So that's how I came into the whole concept, the phenomenon of this paranormal hotspot, which we're going to talk about tonight, obviously, the more details and logistics about it. But this place is really fascinating, and it's an hour from my house.
Well, you know what's interesting about that, and I don't think you even realize, and you're about to right now, is at one point in time a couple years ago, I reached out to you and said, hey, man, I've been looking into this area within Pennsylvania that has a lot of Bigfoot sightings.
That's right.
And I says, I'm thinking about going out in there and camping there at some point at night and spending the night. And you says, I would be down for that, because I've asked you about doing some of the paranormal stuff a couple times. And you're like, you know what? I used to see a lot of things with ghosts, and I really, just not something I follow these days, but that would be something I'd be interested in. And it just never happened. Well, it was a couple of years later that Caroline brought this up to your attention and actually was talking about the place, which you never had known because you never heard me say the name of the place because I'd forgotten it. I just said there was this place.
Connected the dots.
Yeah, there was this place I was looking at, man. We should go check out sometime. And I never had told you the name, but you saying that tonight, it makes me laugh, because I'm like, you know what? I'd actually mentioned it to you a few years ago, and we just never followed up on it. So we got brought back to it
for a long time, and it sort of had to find its way to us. Like, I felt like this place was drawing and calling us in, and I just didn't have the awareness to see its significance until like.
That's pretty
so that's really cool. Yeah, you're right. No, he's absolutely correct, guys. He propositioned me about this paranormal hotspot a long time ago. I was definitely interested, but he and I are both really busy guys, especially in the summer, and it's just like nothing manifested for us to physically go there together. But then all of a sudden, Caroline proposes that we go there and do an investigation, and I'm like, well, I'm a filmmaker and I like telling stories. Why don't I bring my camera and see what happens?
Well, and the funny thing is, I didn't think about it until now either, and you had reached out to me and said, do you want to go and explore Chestnut Ridge in Kecksburg?
That's right.
And I was like, yeah, I'll go. And I didn't even think, like, I'd offered this to him a while back, but I didn't know about Kecksburg. I'd heard of it. Didn't really ever connect the dots that was a part of Chestnut Ridge. I just knew that I watched this thing. I think the documentary was called Invasion of Chestnut Ridge. That's right. And it was done quite well about, some guys who had put together what collection of evidence that they could get, and I really liked the documentary. Got some of the information from that documentary, actually, even for this evening's show, because Stan Gordon was the one who is well known in the paranormal, who put together a team back in the 70s or 60s, I think it was, and he's been doing paranormal. He built like this unit of doctors and police officers, firemen, all these respected people. They came together for this group of paranormal reports where people would report happenings and they would go out and investigate it and compile a giant amount of data across all of these townships to try to figure out what was going on there. And he's been doing that for like well over 50 years at this point. And it's pretty interesting because he was part of that documentary, and I liked a lot of the things they had to say because some of the accounts that they're having, I mean, as you said, not only one of the most significant happenings an hour away from your house, but it is one of the biggest in the country and the world. When you start to look into it, you say, oh, wow, there is, per sightings and per events that have happened in this small area, it's huge. It is very, very big. So, folks, we'll tell you a little bit about Kecksburg. Kecksburg had a UFO crashing. That happened on Thursday, December 9th, 1965. A acorn-shaped UFO was going across the sky. People seen it as far up as Ontario, Canada. Flames in the sky. And then all of a sudden, boom, it lands in this small town in Pennsylvania. Within an hour, they said the military was there. It was so quick. People said literally within 1 hour, military were there. Within a couple hours, squads of military were there. They were being run and controlled by feds of some sort who wore all black suits. This is not a joke. I know people are going to be like, Men in Black. Okay. No, this was quite a while back, obviously. Reports were that these guys in black suits showed up. They ran the show. They were ordering people around. There was people running around in NASA, had NASA badges on their outfits and everything, and were controlling what was going on. They pushed the town people back. Some were even threatened by gunpoint, and they brought in military vehicles down into the woods where this crash happened, and were seen leaving with something covered up with a tarp that was in the shape of this acorn-looking UFO. People even went as far as saying they seen writing on the side of this vessel, which if you look at the monument there today, it is an acorn-shaped UFO with writing down the side of it. But when the news hit 2 days later across the country, it said that expected UFO crash turns out to be something along the lines of like mass imagination, mass hallucination. It didn't happen. Nothing was found in the woods. All this talk that everybody had been talking about was false, and they couldn't find anything. Yet the town people seen them take this vessel away, were threatened, and they were going as far as having some children run around and tell the others there was nothing there, that nothing was happening, where they paid young kids, like 10 and 12 years old, to go around and tell all these visitors coming into the area, these spectators, hey, there's nothing to see here, they didn't find anything down there, it's all a hoax, this and that, so people would just turn around and leave. And I found that fascinating. I mean, they were there so quickly, they tried to cover it up quickly, they said nothing was ever found, yet obviously it was. Now, years prior, and definitely years since, the Bigfoot sightings have not stopped. There is quite a large abundance of ape-like men that have been seen in this area. And one of the things that I found very interesting is everyone's account is very similar. Whether it's different places, different towns, everyone talks about seeing these large ape-like creatures covered in hair in this area of woods. But what they first notice is they hear what sounds like a human baby, but different, wailing and crying in the woods. And then they notice these beings. They're usually accompanying with lights in the sky. Some have even been seen carrying orbs of light on them, running into the woods, and then above in the sky a light beam coming down into the woods, and then everything being gone. No longer seeing the ape men, no longer seeing them, like they're being picked up from their vessel. So Daniel, what are your thoughts on some of these things?
Well, it's all very familiar and common to me that I've heard that Sasquatch being part and parcel to UFO extraterrestrials, and I'm also part of a community of, extraterrestrial sort of followers that work with the races called the Essassani and the Yael, and these races will talk about the Sasquatch as a species, as if they're like local hominids that have been here longer than humans, and that they're very spiritually conscious, that they're multidimensional, and that there are races who will come down and pick up Sasquatch, and the Sasquatch will actually go on their ships and communicate with them, and that they're all very conscious and they work with each other. So it's not surprising to me that in this area people might see UFOs associated with a Sasquatch sighting. So that would be my explanation to that. But yeah, I mean, some of the people say that there are more sightings in those parts of like the border of West Virginia and Pennsylvania in this Bermuda Triangle than like Washington State, which is where I grew up. I lived there for 17 years. And there are so many Sasquatch sightings on the West Coast, like Mount Shasta, where I had my encounters, and Washington State, that I always thought that was like the most prevalent area in the country for the Bigfoot species. But this area, it seems like it's almost like a portal system. They're so common out there. And while I've got the floor here, I also wanted to draw attention to some other cryptid sightings in the area, that it's not just Bigfoot and Sasquatch directly pertaining to maybe the UFO races that are going in and out of this area. But have you ever heard of the the trolls, the little dwarfen sort of goblin community that people say live in?
I have. And you know what? I don't know if it's in that area, and I'd have to ask one of my old label mates. But one of my old label mates sent me a picture one time. He's not really into the paranormal or anything, but he said, "Hey, man, I know you got your radio show and you're into all that. You go on all these investigations." He says, "Can I share a picture with you that is in my family?" And I said, "Yeah, man, not a problem." He says, "This came from, I believe it was his grandfather's camp. He has a trail cam, for deer and different things in the woods."
Sure.
He said he was looking through his trail cam pictures. He says, "Can you show me?" And I know that there's been other famous trail cam pictures that have been put out and caught some pretty weird stuff. He caught this image at like 4 o'clock in the morning of what looked like a small boy standing in the woods. But this is like deep into the woods. No one lives anywhere near this dude's camp. And he wasn't like a small boy. He was only the size of a small boy, but he looked like a grown man, and he was extremely muscular. And he's standing there, and you can see him. It's one of the best captures of anything I've ever seen, to be honest with you. I mean, it's definitely not faked. It's a real picture. And this came straight from a source that I knew. He says, "My grandfather caught this. He showed me right away. The whole family's been puzzled for years now." He says, "What do you make of this?" And I said, "Well, there's different, cultures of gnomes that live out there." And I know people will think that's crazy, but there are. I mean, elementals, and the element of earth is the gnomes. And within gnomes, there are brownies. There are all these other types of gnomes, or different class. Well, I believe this was a brownie. And I was like, dude, and I have to try to see if I can drum that up. I'll drop it on the Celestial Oddities page. It was phenomenal. I mean, when he got this over to me, I'm like, dude, you realize what you got right here? This is a gem. You caught a picture of a gnome.
That's amazing.
It was phenomenal. And it's the only one I've ever seen.
And I have heard other people talk about a community of like little troll-like creatures, gnomes, pixies, sprites, fairies, like that whole realm seems to be. Well, let me ask you this, okay? I don't want to go too far off on a tangent, but like I'm big into the philosophy of why, okay? So do you think if this Bermuda Triangle of Pennsylvania is such a paranormal hotspot of the esoteric, do you think that there are ley lines that run through, or do you think that there are portal systems? What about this particular geographical property draws so many sightings and interactions and experiences with these creatures?
Well, that's actually a very good point, because I believe there are ley lines in the world, but I also believe there's areas of phenomena that right off the bat you want to say, well, it must have a huge ley line underneath it. No, there are areas that are different but have activity because of stargates and because of wormholes and portals. And one of the accounts said about in this area of Chestnut Ridge, there was these guys that seen this light glowing in the woods while they were camping. It was about 60 yards from them. All of a sudden, this light came on and started just moving around and dancing within the deep of the woods. They didn't know what it was. They watched it for a minute or two, and they'd never seen anything like it in their life. They end up turning their flashlight on like, is someone out there messing with us? And when their light hit this light, all of a sudden behind them, this square box of a thing, kind of misty, lit up with a light, and that orb went straight into it, and then it just like gone. And it was what I would consider a portal. The way they described it and everything, from my knowledge, that's exactly what it is. Okay, so it went through a portal system. Some of the Bigfoot sightings that have been here, they've been known to be carrying, as I said, orbs with them, which makes me almost think that that's like their token to use the portal system, like it's a key card or something. I don't quite understand it, but it's some type of technology where they have it on them and they can use it. We have talked about on the Missing 411 episode where there had been a lot of Bigfoot sightings around where all these people were going missing. And we had said, what if they are being abducted of some sort, or what if something's happening to them? And it's consistent with the Bigfoot sightings. But we had mentioned during that episode, what if they are using portal systems and they are one and the same, associated with these alien sightings and beings, as we often see? There's obviously a different race of some sort, but why are they always accompanying UFO sightings? Where are they going? You see them 1 second, they run a couple trees down and they're gone. They have to be using some sort of portal. So to answer your question, I think yes.
Right. And we've also discussed in the past on my philosophy and my beliefs about vibrational frequency and how, the way energy moves. And I also wonder that if there is somewhat of a local community of Sasquatch, because I think they do travel in clans. I know for a fact they travel in clans, which could be large families that are also have subfamilies as well. So if these creatures are, mystical, magical, and they are of a higher vibrational frequency, which is why they, so openly work with extraterrestrials, I wonder if there is a local community or even a local hidden population of them, if that creates what I call as density pockets of vibrational frequency in a sense of its own, that creates its own access point for vortices and portals. The presence of them alone could raise the frequency so much that that could maybe be creating it, turning it into that paranormal hotspot, drawing that energy in.
Well, and that's interesting because I think of sometimes when you're stepping at a higher frequency. So if we look at different frequencies as different dimensions, you can look at it as when someone comes through a portal, you're thinking like they're coming from another world into our world. Well, yes, true, but what if they're coming from the same exact world at just a different frequency? They're there all the time, but we don't interact with each other because we're on different densities. And when they step through the portal, they're coming through ours and we see them and they disappear back out. But they're not like halfway across the world or from another planet or for anything. They're right here, right now, just operating at a different vibration. And that wormhole is just a channeling of taking their vibration down to ours. And we're seeing merely the reflection of what that being would look like at our density. And when it goes back to whatever it is. So what we're seeing is just a representation of it, but it's literally operating right on top of ours as simultaneous layers.
Right, I completely agree. And I've used the analogy before that densities are almost like a radio that you can tune AM, FM, or just different stations, and they're all coming from within the same, like you said, maybe the same planet, but another alternate frequency of it. And you could look at the analogy of them being stacked up on top of each other or inside of each other or just to the left or just to the right. Maybe, we're third density, third dimensional beings in the middle, but then there are 2D beings, 4D, 5D, 12D, and they're all a total different version of reality just on that different bandwidth.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
We're at internet, connection, and it's endless what we turn into. You know what I mean? There's a different channel for everything. Everybody tuning in with their computer right now has got a different background. That's what this is. A million worlds on top of one another operating from the same stream. And it's interesting to be able to time hop through one another, because when you're going through deep levels of meditation or trance work, you tap into this feeling of just that. You tap into they're operating right now at the same time I am in the same world, but just a completely different frequency. And when I tune into their world, they tune into mine, and it becomes reality. Mm-hmm. There are a million realities, but none of them are happening for you because you're not tuned into them, but they're still happening.
And then to expand on that even further, 2 points that I think are really cool is, number one, I've heard the analogy used that the internet, our internet, is actually its own quantum alternate dimension or its own density in of itself. Because if you look at the non-locality and how non-linear time is on the internet, how you can access a website or an email or a video or a live stream that's broadcasting over multiple different time periods throughout the world, and it's all wireless data. You know, like everything that you're hearing right now isn't physical. It's sound. It's vibrational sound. It's light, but it's all quantum energy, and so that the internet is actually its own dimension, in a sense.
Oh,
and so that was one point I wanted to make, and then the second point I wanted to make was that when you talked about how the densities are all we were describing the difference in the densities and dimensions, and what I was going to expand on that is that I also perceive them as part of our own consciousness, and that as hard as it might even be to grasp the idea that aliens and monsters live in other vibrational frequencies, other densities that might be lighter or lower than ours, I still believe that we as individuals, all of those massively quantum densities and dimensions different than ours still collapse with us. They still expand from us and collapse with us. And that they're not actually a destination that you can go to, but they're a level of awareness and a level of vibrational consciousness that you can access yourself, like a type of technology, by being of the right frequency and having an awareness of it. But that it all kind of like starts with us as what is it called? There's a term for it. It's slipping my mind, but if we're the focal point, or maybe the start that expands from us, it's all of this is contained within our own consciousness. So
I can dig that, though. You know, sometimes, and we'll jump back into, we're going on a tangent, folks, but I like it.
We do this.
We do this. You know, I like to a lot of times think that we're all operating from that same point of focus. It just, I mean, that's what a lot of people think, but I mean, when you start to really deep dive into contemplation of that we are all individual, but we are all exactly the same, living the exact same experience with one another at the exact same time. And
Correct.
We can think about the history, we can think about the past and the future, but all that matters is right now in this moment, 6 billion minds that are all just mighty micro pieces of the bigger picture are operating at the same time in unison. Like a fine ballet going on all around us, and we don't even realize it, but we're all the same, and we're all choreographed in the same movements. And it's hard to explain to someone unless you've tapped into that. And that's you know, the way I look at it.
I can actually see that with my eyes closed.
It's beautiful. No, you got to wonder where these beings and creatures come from and where they come into play. And like I said, I think it's just a different frequency, because we often want to look up instead of looking necessarily in front of us. We look and say, oh, the UFOs are going up into space and aliens are coming from here, but where are Bigfoot coming from? How are there so many different creatures of phenomena happening in the same area? Because there is now this open wormhole, this open gate, that all of these beings of different vibration in our world are now slipping and mixing and mashing in different worlds.
Right.
So we're seeing the bleed over of Yetis coming into our world and to gnomes coming in, or maybe they've always been here. I don't know, but it seems that where those wormholes come from, there's always a lot of activity. So that's the gateway between worlds.
And there are hotspots where they do phase in and out. And I also think that one thing I'll tell people about forests, and when you have dense areas of, you know, trees and foliage, I think that plants also put off a high vibrational frequency. And I think that the reason why people have these paranormal encounters with, be it extraterrestrial or cryptids, I think it's because it's not that they're hiding in the forest and they're hiding from humans and they're peeking around the corners all the time. I think that trees and dense forested areas create density pockets of higher vibrational frequency where those creatures can slip into our reality. So if you go into the forest, it isn't that that's where they live and that's where they hide. It's that you're now meeting them halfway in a frequency of the trees that is higher and closer to maybe where their baseline operating oscillation is.
I believe that. Yeah, because it's often secluded and somewhere, you know, obscure where a lot of the activity happens, and that's the kind of the bleed through between the worlds. Is there's something there, and that's pretty interesting. Now it makes you also think, like, whenever you see a lot of these sightings, heavy UFO sightings, they're saying that there's radiation levels in the ground around there. You have to wonder if that is the cause of causing a doorway. So is that the cause of causing the doorway to open between worlds? When there's those big, somehow alien visitations where they were able to break through their frequency into ours and open a new gate, there's those radiation events where like the ground is glowing sometimes when you hear that. There's been a lot of these specific sightings in the Kecksburg area or around the mountains there where people talked about after seeing UFOs, not just in the sky, folks, which is normal. A lot of these sightings were landed UFOs. Let's make that clear. There was a lot of landed actual sightings where one in particular, a guy that they have on audio tape that they interviewed, he sounded very credible, was coming back home at night and came across this, this disc in his yard up in the field, and he drove up to it and actually seen two beings emerge from this disc walking across the yard and making these crying baby sounds. And he says that one would walk up to the next post in the wire fence because they were like on a farm. They walked post to post, Daniel. And the bigger one, as it got to each post, it would cry out in this god-awful baby crying sound. And then one from the post behind it, a smaller version of it, about a foot smaller, would walk up to it and stop. When it got to it, it would cry out, and then he would walk up to the next one, cry out again, that one would walk up to it. So he was like leading the pack, and the one behind it was coming up post by post to it and stopping. And he says him and these two young kids witnessed this happen. He had a rifle and he shot a couple tracer rounds above its head to try to scare it, and it just turned and looked at it like it didn't even faze him. And at the wave of his hand, when he stuck the Bigfoot creature stuck its hand up, one thing I didn't mention is the vessel that it was coming from was this giant red glowing orb in the field. He said it looked like the field was on fire, like there was a mini sun in the field. And he said as soon as that Bigfoot waved its hand, instantly the vessel went dark, and then all you could see was the two creatures' eyes from across the field, and that's when he fired at it above their heads to scare it. And all he seen was eyes moving around, and then as quick as that happened, the vessel was gone. And the part of that, and it was in that documentary, that invasion of Chestnut Ridge.
That's right.
It was phenomenal. I'm like, wow, that's a hell of a sighting. And I really resonated with that sighting because it really explained a lot of things. These Bigfoot creatures came out of this vessel, and they came here for whatever reason. Because they, especially in this saturated area, most of the alien vessels are seen in the sky, but no one's ever seen a gray that I've heard. Only thing they've seen is dogmen.
That's right.
And Bigfoot ape-men-like creatures. Now, they have seen other cryptids like lizard-type creatures. There was like a pterodactyl thing. There's thunderbirds that they have seen, but no one's ever actually said that they've seen what appears to be an alien-like being. Like what we would think of alien, like grays and things like that. They've only seen what we consider cryptids.
That's very interesting.
Very different than most sightings.
You know, another thing I'll say, a little synchronicity about Kecksburg, I was recalling this, that I don't want to say that the area was like calling to me, but this other synchronicity I forgot to mention earlier about Kecksburg, which is, part of this Bermuda Triangle, was that same summer that we went out, investigated, and did our documentary. I'm a wedding videographer, okay, and I shoot a wedding almost every Saturday of the month, and I shot a wedding at somebody's personal house during that COVID. It was like 2020, that first COVID year. It was a house wedding in Kecksburg, which is small. It's small in terms of a town, in terms of a community. It's not like huge. And like Uniontown would be bigger. We've been to Uniontown together, you and me, and that's like a city. That's like a town. That's like a But Kecksburg is like smaller, a little bit more remote, a little more rural. And I would actually shot a wedding there, okay, a month before we initially went as a team, as friends to investigate. And here's how I knew. This first time that I went, right, I had no awareness that the town's name was Kecksburg and that that's where I was just a month prior. But as you go into the town of Kecksburg, where the Acorn UFO Monument is and where they have a festival every year, which we should go just for fun.
It's in 3 weeks. It's on the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th.
Of this month?
Of this month, correct.
Oh, that's figures it. I'm supposed to be in Buffalo.
Yeah, I think I got something going on that weekend, too, because I was looking into it, and I'm like, damn it, I'd like to go.
Dude, let's go Friday. Let's go for an hour. Okay, so as we're going into the small town of Kecksburg, I passed the fucking house that I shot the wedding at a month prior, never having any affiliation or connection to this paranormal hotspot as a point of significance recommended by my friend Caroline. We drove past the house, and when I saw it, I was like besides myself. I was like screaming. I was like, Caroline, Lauren, that's the house I shot at last month and didn't even know that I was here. I didn't even make the connection that I had been here before, and now suddenly I'm brought cosmically. I'm brought back here again to research the paranormal, and it's like it was one of those aha moments where I almost felt like out of body, dude. It was so surreal that I had been here before and not known it, that it felt like I was in an episode of The Twilight Zone. I know I'm fanfaring this a lot, but you can imagine my shock going to this weird old place with monsters that I had been to just 1 month prior to shoot a wedding and didn't even know they were the same place.
No, it's trippy, man. And I mean, that area has a strange feeling. That's one of the things that a lot of people said is there's just a lot of weird happenings there, and it just feels weird in general. Now, when we were there, I won't say that I necessarily felt weird how you would think like something's off. It did have its own feeling, though.
There's an energy to it.
There's an energy to it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say that you just feel like a strange energy from it. But I just love the place because it's so unique. It is kind of tucked away, and it is so close. But the sightings are pretty amazing. I mean, you think of Yetis, you think of Bigfoot, you think of UFO sightings, even glowing lights in the sky. But you don't hear people talking about the gnomes that often. You don't hear people talking about dogman sightings, and there's been a couple of really vivid dogman sightings.
Yes, there have.
In this area. 3 women had seen one up and close, had watched this thing stand up, and it had a long snout. It was very muscular looking, but very bestial looking, but stood up kind of like a man. It wasn't a regular dog of any sort. It wasn't a coyote or a wolf or anything. And they had seen it clearly, and all 3 collaborated a story. And then there was another sighting that happened at Loyal Hannah Dam, which I've fished at before, which is trippy. Like when I came across this, I'm like, oh shit, I've fished there before, and it is kind of weird. But some guy was fishing at night and looked over and kept seeing something moving on the same side of the shore as him, and as they got closer, he got a full visual of this upright, standing, hairy, beast-like creature, but he didn't say anything about it looking like an ape. He had said it had a snout on him, and it looked like it had mange, which is how you would think like a really rough-looking werewolf would look. And he ran to his car and got into it, and it ran over and kind of grabbed onto his door and was looking at him. But as it pulled away, it actually he said it waved to him, which is the craziest thing of the story. He said it actually waved like goodbye. So it understood, but this was another sighting in the same area that mixed in with a lot of the other sightings that have happened there. So it's fascinating.
That's awesome, man. I really do think that there is something special about it. And, the place supports its title, the Bermuda Triangle. Everybody knows what that is, what that means when you hear it. And this place, between the locals and the stories they have to share, with the accounts and the multiple documentaries, including our own, that have been produced there, I do think that there is something special about it. I didn't feel like a malevolence or an evil. It's just somewhere that seems to cater to the community of those creatures and those beings that we don't know a lot about.
Not at all. I love it. And looking at it, there obviously is something going on there because the government showed up quick. So even if you say, okay, the sighting of the crash was fake, or some of these people, well, the government seemed to obviously take it very seriously, being there within the first hour, barricading off the area, bringing military vehicles in, people seeing this vessel leave, and then the newspaper comes out and says nothing was found there. Government says nothing to see, and that they were paying kids to tell people off and this and that. It's pretty interesting. There's too many people, agreeing to this to say that everybody's making it up.
Right.
And they've embraced it and have that festival every year, as we talked about. But, I mean, the Men in Black were there. I mean, there's multiple talks of people showing up to their homes, talking to them about what happened, saying you didn't see what you saw. Right. Whatever you have, we're taking it, where they were collecting people's photographs of any type of feet prints that they were seeing, any sightings, any audio recordings, destroying evidence, and then that same agent would disappear. The business card they gave wasn't to someone you could reach. Wherever they were staying wasn't a real building. Gone. I mean, these Men in Black characters were here covering up what was a very large-scale UFO crash. I would go as far as to say that there was probably bodies in the woods. I mean, because they said that there was pieces of this vessel falling off across Michigan the whole way here. I mean, it was flaking off in the sky, and then it crashed. People seen it, and they brought in, the one guy had said on that other documentary that they brought in vehicles to transport things besides the craft. So I'm thinking it probably was for what was the bodies of these things that crashed.
And that promotes some really fun and interesting imagination, because if you Google search pictures of the monument, you can find them online, or you watch our film, which I'll talk about here in a minute. The Acorn Monument is said to be life-sized. Okay, so real size, real dimension and height. So it's not huge.
No.
If you look at it, it isn't big. It's not like when you think UFO, you think like the mothership. But no, this thing is like, what, dude? Like maybe like 7 by 6?
Yeah, I would say no bigger than 7 feet tall and 6-7 feet wide.
And it makes you wonder then how big were the creatures on that craft? Was it a one pilot ship where it was a little guy? Was it like a whole bunch of really, really small ones, like action figure size? Who knows what was in there? Maybe
and maybe as you change over dimension or over frequency, that can change as well, where they're able to transport in small, convenient sized craft, and as they get out of the craft, they become large size. We oftentimes, folks, want to think of aliens and grays and Bigfoots as separate creatures, though they might be associated with one another. What if they are the same creature operating in different dimensions, operating at different densities?
They change form and shape and almost species.
Well, because as they're trying to get back up to their own dimension to get back to their world, or down in dimension to get to ours, they go through different series of changeovers, like different channels on the TV. So we think like, okay, I seen an alien 7 miles away, but someone down here seen a big ape-like creature. They don't match, but they're both coincided. Well, what if they're the same? What if as it's changing frequencies to get back or to get down to your frequency, you see it change into Bigfoot, you see it change into Dogman, you see it change into Thunderbird. You see these things changing because it is changing to use the radio receiver, the radio, amplifier, as you talked about earlier. Well,
let me tell you this. I've heard from 2 different alien races that I work with, one of them through channeling, which is Bashar, and the other one through the Taigetan Pleiadian contactees through the Cosmic Agency channel that I work for as a voiceover actor. I've heard this analogy from both of those sources, which are extraterrestrial sources, that we have a version of ourselves in every density. And that corroborates with what you just said. And that in each of the lower versions, we're in a sense just a shadow of what our higher density self is. So maybe if you've ever heard of the concept that we have a higher mind or a higher self, then what if in the 3rd density, Frater has a 4th density aspect of himself, which is like the deities? Maybe you're one of the deities that you work with as your 3D Frater. And then in your 5th density self, even that 4th density version is just a shadow of it, which is even a more cosmic, multidimensional being, even like a godlike in a sense, for lack of a better analogy. But as we climb the scale of these densities, it's been described to me that we have a version of ourselves in each one, and they will look different.
Well, and it brings me to something that I've been looking into for a while now. It's a part of a presentation I'm going to be doing coming up, so I don't want to talk too much about it. But when it comes to the paranormal, as far as hauntings, as far as ghostly activity, there's a theory in work that I've been doing on the aspect that you're not actually interacting with the spirits of the dead, but you're operating with yourself in a different dimension.
That's right.
And whenever you're like, turn on that light, you don't realize that what's turning on that light isn't something opposite of yourself or something exterior from yourself, but it is something internally, yet at the same time in a different frequency, as we were talking about.
That's correct.
So
we overlap.
you're actually overlapping, and what you believe is contact, but it's contact with yourself.
That's right.
And something I'm presenting, folks, if you're listening out there, August 13th, I believe it is, whatever that Saturday is. There is a paranormal convention in Newcastle, Pennsylvania at the Hillview Manor, phenomenal world-class paranormal location for ghostly activity. And I believe that, and then what I'm going to present, and I don't want to spoil it, but that's fine, is there are ley lines. There are areas that amplify activity to happen and make it more frequent to have activity and have bleed-throughs. But it is ultimately you contacting yourself in a lot of cases. There are exterior things from you, but it's all just different densities of everyone else. There's a selected number of beings, and then there's a million different versions of those beings.
And those versions of ourselves also have higher selves as well.
Correct.
And higher densities. It's like a
what
tier
you're
system.
Operating with. So when you're at like a location like that, it's a very large open gated astral or a ley line area that's really amplifying that to happen. But that is what contact is, and it breaks what normal people think. Are ghosts real or not real? No, they are real, but they are not what you think they are.
They could be you on the other side. They're another version of reality.
They're another version of you operating and interacting with yourself, though both blind to it.
And to expand on that further, you could make the argument that we are all the same version. We are all the same being, the same entity that's fractaled into its own unique perspective. And we are all just versions of each other as well. From a very, very far away cosmic, multidimensional perspective.
I'm going to throw one more perspective out at you, and then, folks, we will try to get back to the Chestnut Ridge. It's great to be back, and we just like to really deep dive into just, mind-altering ideas. But so we talked about different areas of the map that have disappeared over time, like the Tartarian mud floods wiping clean Tartaria, Atlantis, and other places like that. Now, I ask, what if this is more of a matrix, and what if this is a program, and it's different than we think it is? They can wipe entire continents or countries out of the timeline, and they do so in a specific process where it eliminates that from our consciousness, replants new things to fill it in and make us forget that it happened. They can't ever cover their tracks perfectly. That's why we get certain things that we're like, oh, it's a conspiracy, or, oh, we know that this happened, like Tartaria. What if that is just the program eliminating certain things to change the game? And it does so in a way that we don't know the game's been changed, because once you're playing the game for so long, it gets pretty boring if you're playing the same level over and over again. So you change the scenery, but you do so in a way that the player never knows he leaves the level.
I think that holds a lot of water. I think that very well could be a factor at play.
Because Atlantis, we think, there's so many mysteries that it existed, and there's evidence that there's these civilizations at the bottom of the ocean. You have Tartaria, and they're saying there's these buildings, that there's these windows down below normal surface, where at one point that would have been like the top of the building, and they just kind of built right over top of them and lost this civilization. I mean, what if that is true? What if it's just done in a way that, for the most part, everyone forget about it, doesn't care? It's encrypted into the programming. And they can keep changing the scenery. We talk about, things changing around us. And what effect is that? The Mandela effect.
The Mandela effect.
We talk about that. Well, what if that is happening and they're changing things and reprogramming it? And whenever you have those moments, it's just the imperfection of the program that they, the virus that they gave us.
Yeah, I've done deep dives on this exact concept, and I think that it's a real factor at play. I think it's part of the glitches in the Matrix we experience.
It's very interesting, man. And I mean, like I said, obviously someone's taking it in, serious with the suits showing up and kind of stealing evidence from people and saying you didn't see what you seen. That says that they knew something happened, and they're certainly trying to cover it up. And I mean, I love to hear that it's so close to home. Now, folks, if you're listening out there, because it's so close, Daniel and I, as we talked about earlier, did make a documentary called A Passion of Mine, the Bermuda Triangle of Pennsylvania, and it's phenomenal. And it's not how you would normally think a documentary on paranormal would be. It's more along the lines of friends going out and making a documentary. So it's a documentary about making a documentary. And it's just about friends getting together and exploring this thing we love, which is paranormal and supernatural phenomena. And Daniel shot it. Daniel did a great job directing it and putting it together. And everyone should see it. It's on YouTube right now. It's available on Daniel's page. And it's great. It showcases what's out there. But I think, Daniel, you and I need to get back out there for another night.
I'm down, man. Let's do it. Let's go.
I think
it's an hour away, dude.
I think a legit night, though, too, like a camping night where we camp out in a tent in the middle of the woods, you and I, and we sit out there and we try to tap into whatever's there.
I agree. Let's do it. And then we'll do an episode about it.
We'll do an episode about it. Well,
we'll podcast from the woods.
I'm here tonight. Garrett's gone. We did make contact and it killed him. Oh, man.
No, I really think we should, and I think there's a lot of value in going back there at least one more time and investigating that area together. And let's do it, man.
It's looking at it, it is interesting too. One of the things, side notes I wanted to throw out tonight is that there was a heavy number of Black Panther sightings in the woods around here. So you hear the lizard mans, you hear the dog men, all that, but then there was a high number of just what people were saying was Black Panthers. And Black Panthers, folks, don't live around here. So I found that to be a very strange side note.
Well, let me just real quick. I want to touch on that. Now, when me and Lauren and Caroline went to West Virginia, I forget exactly where we were. I mean, we were just maybe like 3 hours from where I lived at the time into West Virginia. We went to this place called the Brazen Head Inn, which is pretty deep out there, and it was very mountain-esque. Okay, we're talking rolling hills. Okay, so we're in it. And there was a resort. I think it's like a skiing resort for in the winter. So you guys can look this up. It's a noteworthy place in West Virginia. And we went out to do a Sasquatch investigation, a Sasquatch hunt, if you will. We found an off-the-beaten-path trail that just seemed like it went for miles and miles and miles into the woods of this ski resort, which was closed at this time of the year that we went. And we walked for what felt like is maybe a half an hour down this gravel road into the woods, far, far, far away from any of the main artery streets. And we heard some funny sounds. We think they were just owls, but they were weird, sort of like calling sounds. And we didn't want to assume that they were the Sasquatch, but they were definitely strange, definitely sounded otherworldly. And I got some audio recordings, and then we were like, okay, well, let's head back. Now, it was truly pitch black. Okay, no streetlights. The moon didn't do us any favors for us. I mean, it was so black that we couldn't even see a foot in front of us, okay? So we turn back with our little cell phone lights, to aim it at our feet so that we can see 2-3 feet in front of us. And we're walking back down the trail. And all of a sudden we hear a big scuffle in the woods to our right. And everybody just stops moving because it was a very heavy weighted, branches breaking 20 feet away type of movement. So we stop for a second. We listen. We're like, hey, everyone all right? Like, that was a little jarring. Is everybody cool? And we're like, well, yeah, but what do you think it is? And I'm like, okay, well, obviously it's a deer. It's got to be a deer. There's a gajillion deer out here, and I wasn't really feeling the presence of any Sasquatch. I've been in their presence before, and it just isn't something that you can really mistake. It creates like its own sort of like out of body experience when you're in the presence of these things. So I just wasn't feeling that, but there was something big and heavy. So we hold hands because it's dark and I think, everybody was a little on edge at this point. And we were thinking, okay, well, what if it's like a bear or maybe something potentially dangerous? We're going to be safer if we look bigger and we're together. And it was like about a 20-minute walk back to the car. Okay, because we walked inland when it was still light out, which means we walked so long that the sun had gone down. That's how far into the woods we were. So we're walking back and we're hearing these footsteps next to us. Now, it didn't sound bipedal. It didn't sound like 2 footsteps. It just felt like branches breaking in pretty quick movement. Deer, I'm going to tell you this right now, okay? Deer don't follow you like that. They could give a fuck. They don't really, they're more uncomfortable with you than anything. So when a deer crosses your paths in the woods, they try to dip out quick, make their presence scarce. Whatever this was moving with us, okay? So as we're getting to what I feel like is like maybe within like 5 minutes of the car, ahead of us, whatever this thing was, moved further ahead of us, couple 2, 3, 50 feet, I don't know. It's pitch black. I'm disoriented. Everyone's a little on edge. And then we hear, we hear this. Okay, I'll try to do the noise, but it sounded like a, okay, all right? Breathing sounds, heavy breathing sounds, deep breathing sounds. And I'm like, still not a deer for me. Still just didn't really feel like a deer, something that was so bold and brave to follow us for 10 straight minutes and then go up and cut us off. Because now at this point, it's ahead of us towards the direction of our car. Now that to me felt predatory. Could be a bear. I know that there are black bear in that area, but you talked about panthers, black panthers. Now that type of feline is one of the only things, cougars, okay, mountain lions, maybe. But panthers, black panthers, are extremely aggressive. They're hostile. They're volatile. They will attack animals. They'll attack people. I think they're one of the more aggressive feline species. Now, I never saw anything, guys. I'm not trying to hype this up to be something that it wasn't. But in my heart of hearts, I do not believe it was a Sasquatch because I've met them and it just wasn't its MO. And number 2, I ain't never seen no deer chase me down like that for 10 minutes. Do you think it could have been one of those black panthers stalking us in the woods?
I mean, cats can move swiftly, so if you have a cat moving through the woods, it's going to be able to move very quickly, very quietly, but also be very deadly if it needs to be. So there's a very good chance of it. I mean, there was several sightings of this thing. So it wasn't like one person came forward and said, I seen a black panther. There was multiple sightings of people saying, we seen these black panther creatures, just these large black cats. Well, panthers, like I said, don't live in this area, so it'd be weird to see one, let alone multiple sightings of this thing. And what's interesting is the cryptids in this area and the creatures in this area that correlate with these strange sightings. One of the things of note is that they're not afraid of people. The Sasquatch creatures that were being seen by people, and it didn't seem like they mind that they were being seen. They were even shot at and they didn't move until like this person was then thinking of shooting them directly and tried to, and that they went away. The Dogman sightings and things, it might have been scary for someone, but they weren't scared of us. It wasn't like, oh shit, I've been seen, let's try to escape real quick and get away. It was, I don't mind being seen, you could see me, in fact I'll even approach you. And that was interesting in itself.
So listen, guys, the Bermuda Triangle of Pennsylvania is a paranormal esoteric hotspot where there are things that literally go bump in the night, okay, that are not afraid of us. There is a local awareness of the existence and the presence of these creatures. Frater and I have been there ourselves. We're going to go back again. And I encourage you, if you're interested, to do some light research and investigate the area for yourself. And if you live in the greater West Virginia, Pennsylvania area, this is somewhere that you too can drive down to and just walk around for a couple hours and see what happens, see what you feel, see what you catch, because the sightings are there. The corroborated, local, community-driven stories are there. And I also would highly encourage you guys to check out our very lighthearted documentary on this area. It's one part's live action, one part's animated cartoon. I think it's very sweet. It's very tasteful. And I am going to be taking it offline soon so that we can actually market this film to film festivals, because I really am that proud of it that I'd like to get it seen in a professional setting.
I think you should, and I think it'll be received very well. Folks, definitely check it out if you haven't. It's a great documentary. It's a lot of fun. Check out the area, as there is a lot of activity going on there, and it's just a pretty cool vibe to be there. Maybe you'll experience something for yourself. Either way, maybe you'll go back with a story. If you are interested in our next episode, that is going to be on the 21st, 2 Thursdays from now. We are talking about the it's always hard to say, Aokigahara Forest, or what's known as the Suicide Forest in Japan. The phenomena of so many people being drawn to that area only to take their life within the forest, and the hundreds, if not thousands, of people that have died over the years in this chunk of woods, and why maybe that is. So we're going to be talking about that in 2 weeks. Make sure you share tonight's episode. If you have any questions, want to see us do anything different, anything you want to see us do in general, message us at celestialoddities@gmail.com. Again, that is celestialoddities@gmail.com. Add the Celestial Oddities Paranormal Guys podcast page on Facebook, and just be a part of the community. Share our shows around, and hopefully you enjoy the content that we have to bring you. We are excited to be back for another season. Stick around for so many fun guests this year, for so many fun topics, and then obviously the phone calls from you guys. We love hearing those and kind of pondering on what it is you guys have experienced, because as I said, each and every one of us have had something happen in their life. You might not talk about it, but it's happened.
And that this is a safe place for you. We also validate and find relevance in all of your stories, even if they might seem like not a big deal to you. One of the main mission statements that Frater and I have set out, we agreed upon as friends before we started this show, is that we're creating a database, a small key, if you will, of stories from people all over the country, all over the world, who have had a paranormal encounter, and so that we can maybe someday make sense of it, connect some dots, find some threads of a unified theme that maybe will help us understand a greater look into what all of these occurrences mean for us and our consciousness. And so we look forward to hearing from you.
Absolutely. If you guys want to, like I said, message us, you know where to do so. We thank you so much for tuning into tonight's episode. Hope to see you again in 2 weeks. And that's us resigning out. Celestial Oddities Paranormal Guys podcast. We'll see you in 2 weeks on the 21st. Have a great night.